Going over IRS Form 8863, education credits. So this is the tax form that a lot of taxpayers will be using to claim an education credit for either the American Opportunity tax credit or the lifetime learning credit. Before we get into the form itself, we're going to take a few moments to go into a little bit more depth about each tax credit. So the American Opportunity Tax Credit is probably the one that most taxpayers with uh, younger children that are going off to college, young adults, first 4 years, they're probably more familiar with the American Opportunity Tax Credit because it's a larger tax credit and it is only available for the first 4 years of a post-secondary education. Um, After that first 4 years, the assumption is that you can continue to take tax credits over the course of your life for different educational opportunities that you take advantage of, and that would be under the lifetime learning credits. So, a couple of things about the American Opportunity Tax Credit. As you will see when we go through this tax form, kind of breaks down a couple of criteria. So, first 4 years, uh, a part of it is refundable tax credit, which means the refundable part of the tax credit can actually reduce your tax liability below zero. So, in other words, normally, uh, if you have a $2,000 tax credit and your tax liability is only $1,000, then a non-refundable tax credit, like most are, would reduce your tax bill to zero, and then you would have a credit that's disallowed in that it can't reduce your tax liability below zero. Depending on the type of credit, you may be able to carry it forward or carry it to prior tax years and use the remaining credit to offset your tax liability in a different year. With a refundable tax credit, you can take that $2,000, apply it to the $1,000 tax bill, and then keep going, and you end up being eligible for a $1,000 refund, even if your tax bill that year technically is zero. So there is a refundable portion of the American Opportunity Tax Credit. Um, uh, the lifetime learning credit, not so much. Uh, Also, the student has to have been enrolled for at least half-time towards some sort of degree or certificate or like a post-secondary educational credential. And finally, uh, this is part of the law that enables the American Opportunity Tax Credit. It is not available for anyone who has been convicted for a felony drug possession. So a drug-related felony of any sort, of either possession or distribution. If that's on your criminal record, then you can never apply for the American Opportunity Credit as it currently stands. Another thing is that you can't take the American Opportunity Credit and the Lifetime Learning Credit for the same student in the same year. So as we go through this form, there may be instances where you can complete both tax credits on the same form, but only if you have more than one person that you're claiming a tax credit for. So let's jump right into the form. At the top, we're putting in our hero's information, John Doe. He's claiming a tax credit because his son, Timmy, is going off to college and he's claiming that tax credit. So we are going to go straight to part 3 of this form because this is what provides you the information on whether or not you can take the tax credit in the first place. So you do, in this form, you need to complete part 3, and you will need to complete a separate part 3 for each student that you're claiming a credit for. And then once you complete part 3, you'll jump back up to parts 1 and 2, and those are the non-educational, or not, that's the calculation for figuring out what part of the American Opportunity Credit is is refundable and can reduce your tax liability below zero, and then how much of the remaining credits that you might be available for that are non-refundable. So let's go down to part one, and we'll kind of walk through this part of the form. So in block 20, we put our hero's son's name, Timothy Doe, social security number, and it's important to make sure that everything's lining up, right? So the student name as shown on the tax return, social security number, ideally it matches all of your paperwork on file with the college, because you'll be receiving a Form 1098 for this, for tuition that was paid. So put in block 22, we start filling in the information about the college. There is no advanced education institute, but if it was, then you would put whatever it is. So and then we put the mailing address. Did the student receive a Form 1098T? So this is basically a form from the Education Institute stating that here is the amount of tuition that this student paid. So check, we've got a 1098. Did this 1098 come with box 7 checked? So box 7 is where you have prepaid part or all of the next quarter's tuition. So that's an important distinction, because you have a limited ability to prepay and claim that expense in the given tax year, but you just need to be careful about that. And then, of course, the EIN needs to be entered. You should be able to get that. You probably would have that. And if not, then the financial assistance office at the college would be able to give that information to you. So for the sake of this form, he's only gone to one education institution, but if you went to a second, you would repeat that over here on the right-hand side. So lines 23 through 26 are kind of some of the checkpoints. And if you go through all of these, great, you can keep going. But if any point you're not coming up with the correct answer, then that means you're not eligible to take that tax credit. So in line 23, if you've taken the American Opportunity Credit for this student for any 4 prior tax years, doesn't matter if they were 4 consecutive, if you took a tax credit for 2 years and then you take a one-year break and then you take it for 2 more years, it doesn't matter. If you've already taken the American Opportunity Credit for 4 tax years for the same person, you are ineligible for this tax credit. So you would select yes, and then you just stop and go down to line 31, because now you're only claiming the lifetime learning credit. So if you're only claiming the lifetime learning credit, this is a fairly straightforward form. Like the rest of most of this information is for the American Opportunity Tax Credit. But we'll go into line 24. This basically says, hey, did this student meet the at least half-time criteria? 25, did they complete 4 years of post-secondary education? So even if you didn't take the tax credit, if they've completed the first 4 years before the given tax year, then you can't take the credit. And then finally, here's the drug question. If the student was convicted before the end of the tax year of a felony for drug possession or drug distribution, then you cannot take that credit. So we're proceeding as if we made all of these checkpoints, right? So I just put in that adjusted qualified education expenses, you're not allowed to put in a number more than $4,000, but you can put in qualified education expenses. Generally speaking, they can include tuition, fees, course materials, which could include books, supplies, equipment that's needed. Whether or not they're bought from the college or outside the college, it does not matter. For the lifetime learning credit, qualified education expenses include books, supplies, and equipment only if you had to pay the institution directly for that material as a condition of enrollment. And then qualified education expenses also include student activity fees, athletic fees, only if the fee must be paid as a requirement of enrollment or attendance. So if you're opting into some sort of extracurricular activity that requires a fee, but you don't need to join that to be a part of the college, then that wouldn't be considered an eligible or a qualified education expense. Only the fees that are directly related to your ability to attend the college. Furthermore, qualified education expenses do not include personal expenses, even room and board, insurance, medical expenses, transportation, or other living expenses. And they do not include any course or education involving sports, games, hobbies, or any non-credit course unless that course or education is part of the degree program. So, you can claim credits for a PE class, but not necessarily for participating in an intramural version of that sport. So if you took PE or volleyball as a PE class, that's fine. You could use those fees as part of the credit. But if you joined, the club volleyball team, you would not be able to deduct any expenses related to that. So in line 27, we put in $3,600. Line 28 forces you to subtract $2,000 from that amount. You multiply it by 25%, and then you add back $2,000 to this amount. You'll skip line 31 because you can't take the American Opportunity Tax Credit and the Lifetime Learning Credit for the same person in the same year. So you'll sum all of these up. If you had multiple versions for multiple students, you would put all of this stuff on part 1, line 1. So this $2,400, we're now going to carry it up here. So now there are income limitations to the American Opportunity Credit on the refundable side. In order to figure that out, you have to go through steps 2 through 5, basically. So in step 2, John Doe, in this case, is a married taxpayer filing a joint tax return, so we put in $180,000. Your adjusted gross income number from line 11 is $150,000. We just made that up. And then we're going to subtract line 3 from line 2. So we're $30,000 under the threshold. So basically, this is kind of where we calculate the phase out. In this case, we're completely under the phase out, so we'll end up being able to take the full amount of the credit. But let's imagine that let's say that this ended up being $10,000. So now we would have to take this, divide line 4 by line 5, and we would have to basically now take 50% of that credit. Multiplying line 1 by line 5, we'd get $1,200, and then we would multiply that by 40%, and that would be the amount that we could use as a refundable credit. Now back to the original example, we're fully under that phase out, so that doesn't matter. We put in 1.0 as the decimal, which means we're taking this full $2,400, and then we're going to take 24 or 40% of that. So so if you were under the age of 24 and you meet the conditions described in the instructions, then you cannot take the refundable portion of the American Opportunity Tax Credit. You would enter the amount from line 7 onto line 9, and then go through here. You would check this box. So the line 7, basically, you don't qualify for a refundable tax credit if the following apply to you. 1, one of these three conditions. You're either under the age of 18 by the end of the year, you're 18 and your earned income was less than 1/2 of what it costs to support you, or you were over 18 and under age 24 and a full-time student and your income was less than 1/2 of your support. So under those three, like a college student would not be able to take their own credit if their parents are still doing this. Also, if at least one of your parents is alive and if you're not filing a joint tax return. So basically, that's kind of a long-winded way of saying if you're a college student trying to complete this form and through these checklists, it turns out that your parents can also take a tax credit on your behalf because they've actually provided most of your support, then you can't come in behind them and claim the tax credit too. So if you can't claim the tax credit because you're a college student, you would check this box. However, we're filing this on behalf of John Doe. He is the parent, so we don't need to check the box. We simply multiplied the line 7 number by 40%. We'll enter this not only on line 9, we'll enter it on line 8, but then we'll also enter it on the 1040 line 29. Then we'll go directly to line 9 below. We'll subtract line 8 from line 7. This is the amount that we'll enter on the credit limit worksheet. So unfortunately, I can't show you the credit limit worksheet. They're in the IRS Form instructions, and this allows you to go through the income limitations on the non-refundable side. So we did that, and basically we came through the same analysis that we zeroed out here on line 10 simply because there was no lifetime learning credit for any other students. However, we would have put that in here. We skipped lines 11 through 17 because line 31 was 0. And then we entered 0 on line 18. This is the amount that we would have to force through the credit limit worksheet, and it basically forces you to calculate the amount of non-refundable education credits left over. So because we didn't do that, the calculation basically says you're entitled to $2,400, $960 is a refundable credit, the remaining amount, $1,440, is non-refundable. Okay, so that is a much more, I guess, complex calculation, right? So there is a separate calculation worksheet for qualified expenses, but simply, for the lifetime learning credit, you would include any amounts from line 31 onto part 2. So part 2, let's just pretend that we're now trying to claim the lifetime learning credit. And we'll just, whenever I come to a number from the previous calculation, I'll delete it. But let's just say we had $10,000 of qualified education expenses under the lifetime learning credit. Then we would take this information, put it under part 2, line 10. Here in line 11, we would enter the smaller of line 10 or $10,000. So that available credit is up to $2,000, right? So here we're at $150,000, or sorry, $180,000. Our AGI is $150,000. And we would subtract this. So now if line 15 is equal to or more than line 16, then we enter 1.0 here. And then we multiply line 12 by line 17 and we get the full value of the tax credit. So So, sorry, we would enter the $2,000 onto the credit limit worksheet. We would work through the credit limit worksheet, and basically, when we did that, we come up with the $2,000. Sorry. Even if you're not doing the American Opportunity Tax Credit, if you're only doing the lifetime learning, you will take this number right here. You'll put it into the credit limit worksheet provided by the form instructions, and then you'll go through the calculation. And again, the lifetime learning credit is 20% of your qualified education costs up to the maximum of $10,000 a cost or a $2,000 credit. So that's all we have for this tax form. But if you'd like, we've written a step-by-step tutorial article that you can find on our website. Simply go to teachmepersonalfinance.com, type in IRS Form 8863 in the search bar, and you should see our article. If you like our articles, please subscribe to our newsletter. If you like our videos, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions, please post them in the comments section. Thank you very much.